So this is the fourth meeting that we have in this forum of medical devices and deep learning and AI. And today also there is new cups with the logo of the Bay Vision meeting. So we are going to continue and have all these events to have things going on in the community, including sharing knowledge, etc. Whoever have something to present here, we will be happy because we are looking for more presenters here. It is my pleasure today to start with John Axerio-Cilies, and he's from Arterys, the CTO and the founder, and he has a lot of things to present, so let's start.
Great, thank you for the intro. Hi everyone, great to be here. I wanted to just kind of talk to you about my journey in the past 10 years in AI and what I've learned along the way to try to bring AI specifically into the healthcare and more specifically into radiology. So I have kind of four topics that I wanted to talk about in terms of what are some of the barriers that we've had to overcome to try to get real AI into that clinic. And there's many more coming, but I'll just focus on 4 today. So with that, just a little bit about Arterys. So Arterys is a medical imaging company. We have a platform that allows physicians to use clinical applications powered by AI, and we have a couple of applications in the cardiovascular space and oncology space right now, and more coming, developed not only from us but also from partners as well, which I'll get into. So a couple what I'll start with, and I should present here, is these are the 4 areas that we've had to overcome in terms of actually getting AI into the clinical practice. First is around addressing the pain points of our end users, which are primarily radiologists. I'll talk a bit what those pain points are and what we've done to address them. Second is performance. AI is great if you have compute, but the reality is the infrastructure is not there to actually support those workflows. So what have we done to try to overcome that? Security and privacy is huge. And lastly, the actual machine learning modeling and what kind of accuracy we've required in order to make it practical. So the first is medical imaging. So if we look at medical imaging today, generally, especially in radiology, there's a consensus that reimbursement rates are going down, the workloads are actually going up, and data that the radiologist has to actually read is actually going up. So this is kind of a perfect nexus where radiologists are getting burnt out. So there's actually an article that came out yesterday, a couple days ago, showing that over 54% of physicians are burnt out. So this is another study showing that about half the radiologists are burnt out. So they just can't manage like just sitting in a dark room reading like up to hundreds of cases a day, and it is tiring. And at the end of the day, the performance of the radiologist does go down. So that they will miss certain things, and it's been shown that in certain cases that the error rate is up to 30%. So for some cases, specifically in oncology, a doctor or a radiologist will miss, for example, a lung nodule on average 30% of the time. So it is very high. So in terms of what the medical imaging infrastructure looks like today, it's about 20 years behind. So we're in the center of Silicon Valley, and the reality is most of the world out there is not like this. When we have legacy infrastructure, we have systems that are called PACS, the picture archiving communication systems. These are the systems that actually store medical images and where you're able to view medical images. Typically, the PACS are connected to other software systems, like hospital information systems, electronic medical records, additional post-processing workstations. So there's a lot of different screens that for example, radiologists will look at every day. And it's typically a complicated UI, UX, and every single software has a different graphical user interface, so it is cumbersome. And the reality is a pre-internet state. The majority of hospitals, not in Silicon Valley, aren't even connected like in a proper way to the internet. So it's really put itself 20 years ago. So that's what we have to work with if we're trying to actually deploy AI into the hospitals. So what does that workflow look like today? Without AI, what does a typical radiologist do? So a patient will get scanned as some type of scanner, CT, MRI, PET, ultrasound. That data will go to PACS, it'll be stored there. The radiologist will typically view the results on a PACS viewer, and they'll dictate the result of that case into a dictaphone, which then gets sent back into the electronic medical record or into dictation. So that's kind of the typical workflow. So a radiologist is sitting in a dark room, dictating and seeing cases after case after case. So that's the typical workflow, and for some cases, they require additional software to try to process a case. And these are what I call advanced workstations or advanced visualizations. And typically they have, again, different screens, different systems, and it's not a really integrated workflow. So the challenge with that, when we think about where AI can help, AI can typically reduce the amount of time it takes to process a scan, but also increase the accuracy of radiologists by either automatically detecting certain things, classifying certain things, making automatic measurements. That's kind of the lowest hanging fruit for where AI in radiology can help. So in reality, if those are the tasks, where can they be integrated? Well, primarily they can only be integrated at the PACS viewer environment. So integrations are key to actually making AI work. So the challenge is, okay, you have this great AI model or algorithm, how do you integrate it? And the reality is it's really hard. PACS systems don't support just machine learning by themselves. And so you really have a lack of computation. And again, you don't have GPUs in hospitals. There's no racks of GPUs. It just doesn't exist. You have like access from the outside is typically blocked completely. And there's no idea of how, if you were able to actually deploy a box on site, which is what the majority of us have done in the past, even if you have an AI that you deployed, it's hard to know how well that algorithm is doing. So it's typically you just deploy it, and then you try to come back a week later or a month later to try to get the logs to figure out, okay, is it actually working? And actually working is really hard to get the answer to, because typically, even if you present the AI results, somebody has to physically click a button to actually accept or reject it, or else you don't know how well it's doing. And if it's not a click, then maybe there's diagnostic code in the electronic medical record that gives you ground truth, but then trying to loop that back is really, really hard, especially if you're on another box in the hospital. So again, this feedback mechanism to see performance in real life is very, very hard. And of course, the AI isn't integrated into that clinical workflow. And I'll talk a lot about that integration today. So the idea this isn't scalable. So what Arterys is specifically doing is trying to create a new smart viewer that has AI built into it. So we've tried to really create a viewer that allows AI through APIs to be pushed right where the radiologist is viewing the image. And there are different workflows that we can do. We started with the cardiac and in the so for cardiac MRI and lung CT. But the reality is through these APIs we can connect multiple different types of applications directly into a single viewer in a single environment. So that's kind of the basis for our platform. So in summary, what we've been able to do is try to create a way to just view medical images, but also we handle the storage. And it's FDA cleared. We have 6 FDA clearances, and what we're able to do is not only use APIs to develop applications internally, but there's a big effort to try to externalize those APIs, to bring partners to leverage the platform that we built to actually integrate AI right at the fingertips of the radiologist. So that's the Arterys.com platform, which I'll be happy to give a demo toward the end of my talk. And one key piece of this platform, it is cloud native. So what that means is it is connected to the cloud. It does require an internet connection. But by doing that, it solves a lot of problems for us. And I'll talk about what those problems are. So some of the benefits of having a single connected system is that we can actually monitor performance real time. Because going back to how it's connected to the viewer, we know what people are clicking on, so we know whether it's actually saving time, for example. The other piece is we can constantly collect ground truth data or even just raw data from the system, since it's all being centrally collected. And having a mechanism like that helps in terms of the issues of ML model generalizability, or this idea of concept drift, where it's the idea where over time, machine learning, when you deploy it, it may work for the first 9 months, but over time it may stop working. And part of that can be because the scanners may be upgraded, maybe the types of images that are being generated are changed somewhat, maybe the contrast agents have changed, maybe the way that people use AI changes once it's actually in practice. So there's a lot of reasons why AI cannot be a single point in time and then see you for 30 years. It's we're getting to a place where it needs to be constantly monitored and evaluated. And having a central system that is cloud supported enables this idea of constant checking of performance. And I think that's a big push from the FDA as well. This idea of post-market surveillance, of understanding truly how well the algorithms are doing out in real practice. So obviously through a cloud-enabled system that we can do that natively. So I'll talk a little bit about our APIs, but the push for making our APIs more and more public really started from our own architecture. So I don't know how familiar you all with Amazon Web Services, but they back 20 years ago, they decided that they're going to have internal teams all communicate via APIs and really have a kind of microservice architecture that allows for each team to be kind of pretty isolated, and they have clear objectives, and so you can scale in a better way. And that's what we're trying to do at Arterys, to have different teams communicate via APIs. And so we have our inference team that's essentially the service that we can scale horizontally and vertically that allows us to have multiple different types of applications that again integrate back into that viewer. So we're making those more and more public, and we just signed up on our first partner actually a couple days ago. So in terms of just where we are in terms of numbers, this kind of gives you a kind of over the past. We actually started in 2013. So this kind of over the past 7 years-ish, kind of where we've gone in terms of people using our system. So we have over 100 hospitals using us clinically today. Most of that is 50% in Europe, 50% in the US. We have over 1 billion images stored. I'll talk a little bit about how we create our machine learning models in terms of raw data and how we collect our ground truths, but that's a big part of it, is having just the raw images in our database. And I mentioned the FDA, so we're actually cleared in over 100 countries, so if you have any questions as to how to get your models cleared in different countries of the world, I'd be happy to talk about that. So performance, so that's the next wall that we had to break. So when we first started, we had a specific use case of cardiac MRI, and we were dealing with studies that were on the order of 5 gigabytes or more. In some certain cases, we had 20 gigabyte studies. And to try to run any sort of visualization of these studies on PACS, so on local infrastructure, just could not work. Just the time it takes for PACS to try to open a 1 gigabyte study would just be too long, and the radiologist wouldn't even look at it. So we really only had one choice when we started, was, okay, we're going to make an investment in a cloud-native solution. And I want to make a distinction between cloud-native and the way a lot of folks use the word cloud. When you look at our industry, at least in radiology, people use cloud primarily for storage, or this idea of remotely hosted. So Epic is a big EMR company, and they have remotely hosted servers in Wisconsin. And there's hospitals in California that connect to them. So you could say that's cloud, but in reality it's not a cloud-native solution. And of course Netflix and many other companies have cloud-native, and there's advantages to cloud-native in terms of updates, in terms of everyone are part of the same system. We can use feature flags to do A/B testing. There's a lot of benefits to having that sort of solution. So that was one benefit of having cloud-native. In terms of how the system works, So we have, one part is integrations are a big part of it. So how do we get data from all the scanners up into that cloud? So we typically have some sort of edge, we call it our edge software. So it's a piece of software that can live in the hospital, we can live in the cloud, that connects all the scanners, and that kind of acts as a DICOM router. DICOM is the protocol that's used to exchange medical images, and it's the format as well. So essentially, our edge service allows us to transfer images to and from the cloud. And then from there, once the images go to the cloud, we have the inference service that runs the inference live as fast as it can. And then so the user can log into a Chrome browser and view the results in seconds. And performance is critical here. In certain cases, we need to have results back in less than a minute. In certain cases, it can be more than 20 minutes, that's fine. But what we've noticed, especially in the emergency departments, so not in the reading rooms, so not in radiology, is that there's a case where patients come in and the patient will have a stroke. And if you're trying to detect intracranial hemorrhage and you have to decide whether to give TPA, it's really important, seconds matter. And so if you can have that result back as quickly as possible, it can be life or death. So that's part of the challenge, is how to create a system where we have thousands of images coming in every second and having it perform well. And so that's one of the benefit of the cloud. Next is how do we integrate? So the viewer is one part, but that's not the full story. I mentioned the electronic medical record, right? And I mentioned there's other systems in the hospital. So a lot of the time we spend at Arterys is really spent on integrations. And you may think that we have over 100 people. The reality is we spend less than 5% of our time actually doing machine learning. The rest of the time is spent on everything else, and most of that everything else is integrations, legal, paperwork, regulatory, and it's the unsexy part of trying to make this actually work. So in terms of integrations, a big part of it is integrating with the radiology information systems. There's products called like work list, and that's how radiologists read the studies. So they'll click on certain patients, and when they click on those patients, they expect it to be, they expect the viewer to come up immediately. So we'll have those sort of integrations. And if any of you have seen what a reading room looks like, I have actually a picture of it. But they have multiple screens, so they have multiple different softwares all come up with a single click. And so that's the sort of integrations that we're talking about, like URL launching and reporting integration. So the AI is viewable on Arterys, and then they click a button to push that to the reporting system, and then that radiology report is what you typically get sent to your referring physician. So like the currency of a radiologist is that single page, which is just text. And most of the time, it doesn't have a lot of high fidelity in it. It's a very raw result, and most of the time, you cannot use that as ground truth data. It's unfortunately, it's not very good data at all, and it's very noisy. So I'll talk a little bit about annotation, but annotation is critical for us, and we have to do it in real time, and we got to pay for it, because it's the data that exists today are just terrible. All right, so this is a picture of how it's actually integrated. So this is a 3-monitor setup, and you should all go visit a reading room once, but some folks have 4 monitors, 5 monitors. Some of the fancier places have 1 massive monitor. But again, there's multiple different things going on here. All these systems have to communicate with one another. So that's part of the challenge, is actually integrating. And so you gotta have a lot of integration teams that go in and understand the workflow, how the data gets to certain places. And it's not just DICOM, so there's another standard called HL7, and that's typically the protocol that's used to communicate any sort of messages in the hospital. And so we have both DICOM and HL7 interfaces to communicate with, both in terms of communicating the results of the AI, but also in terms of flags in terms of the studies available, the studies ready to be viewed, the images have been sent from X to Y. So there's a lot of things, messages that are being sent back and forth. So these are some of the integrations that we've done in terms of in context application launching from Epic and RSIP and all the types of data imports and exports that we support. But most of the time, these are custom integrations. And because part of that was going back to legacy infrastructure. Right now, all of those systems that are in hospitals were developed 20, 25 years ago. And so we have to support the interfaces that were built 20, 25 years ago. So it is a little bit of a mess, but that's just what it takes to actually get it done. This is an actual result of, we have academic partners that provide machine learning models to us. And so this is a result of just them leveraging our API. So it's, they can, with a single command line, upload a Docker image that has the machine learning model integrated into it. And then we'll take that result and we'll publish it into our viewer, and it makes it completely viewable. So in this case, this was automatic segmentation of the liver. So we were able to take that result and make it viewable in our viewer so that they can 3D rotate and they can make measurements on the liver, and they can edit even that segmentation if they wanted to. The lasting part in terms of performance is around reliability, and people are concerned about cloud and how reliable that can be. So this is just a text exchange I had with a radiologist, and I asked them, how often does your internet go down in your hospital? And they said, I don't remember the last time it did. And then I asked, how often does your PACS go down in your hospital? And they said, all the time. So that's really what we see, is that PACS today break a majority of the time. There's certain PACS vendors that are better than others, but in general, it's a terrible, terrible piece of software. And what's happening is hospitals are being acquired by other hospitals, and they're integrating. And so if you try to integrate multiple PACS systems together, it wasn't built for that. So all these PACS vendors are trying to consolidate and build a scalable PACS. In reality, it wasn't meant for that, and it just breaks. So that's what we're seeing out of the field in reality. And so we feel like a new infrastructure is required, and we're making the bet on that it is cloud. I can tell you when we started, back in 2013, we went into a security review, and we said, with a prominent hospital, we said, is it okay if we do cloud? And they're like, hell no, there's no chance we will ever do cloud. And this is a quote from the same hospital, where it says, if a new product we're considering isn't cloud enabled, we probably won't buy it. So in the last 7 years, it's been a strong shift in embracing more and more cloud solutions. I'll say it's not there yet, but it's getting there. Security and privacy is another big issue. One part around security and privacy is breaches. So hospitals are very concerned about their data leaving the network in case that it gets hacked and it gets published online. Because every record that gets published online, you just pay a fine for that. So in reality, what we see in the field is that there's been a lot of ransomware attacks. So these are attacks primarily with spear phishing or phishing, where somebody will get an email, they click the link, and some ransomware will be installed on that particular pieces of within their infrastructure, on their desktop devices, on their Windows machines, and they'll encrypt all the data in the hospital, and then they'll ask for a Bitcoin or Bitcoins in order to unencrypt that data. So this has happened several times, and most of the time you don't know about it. Like the hospitals will try to not publish that. And so there's a lot of these actually happening in reality. There was one just in Baltimore happened a few weeks back that was public. So that's a true attack that happens more and more cases with on-premise solutions. As long as the cloud provider is updating operating systems, it limits that threat. And lastly, there is this idea of physical attacks. So in that video, there was a firm that goes in with physical penetration testing. They go in and use garbage to open up any door in a hospital. So anybody who, you actually don't even need to be an expert. You can walk into any hospital today. If you see an Ethernet cable running across the floor, you can just unplug it, plug it into your computer, and see PHI. It's not that hard to do. So, and lastly around cloud, and I'll make the bold statement that actually cloud is more secure than on-premise. Nothing is secure, everything can be hacked. But I'll say that out of all the breaches that have occurred, last year, 0% were running in the cloud for business associates. So there's a graph there showing the hacks in terms of provider on the hospital side, on the health plan, on the business associate side. In terms of how do we protect our data, it's all about security and layers of an onion. So the more layers we have, the more secure we can be. But again, nothing is foolproof. But we try to be as foolproof as we can. So it starts with data security, application security, host security, networks, policies, physical security, and training. So those are all the things that we have to prove, also to get certain certifications around security and privacy. So next is AI accuracy. So what I'll do to start is maybe just show you a quick demo of our system, and then I'll describe kind of what we did to actually build those applications and some of the performance metrics. So what I'll do is log in here. So this is just a Chrome browser. So once you log in, you'll see a particular work list here. So what I'll do is look for one case here. So I will open up this case. So as this is opening, this is our long CT package. So what the workflow here is, we're trying to automatically detect lung nodules in patients, primarily that have a chest CT exam. So there's actually a lot of that's been published around if you can catch a lung nodule early, you can increase the survival rates substantially. It obviously depends on what stage you're in, stage 1, 2, 3, or 4 of cancer, but if you can catch it at stage 1, you're much more likely to survive in terms of 5-year survival than obviously if you catch it at stage 4. So there's a big push to try to get more and more folks out in terms of lung cancer screenings. So this particular software, what it does is it will automatically identify or detect lung nodules, and then from there it'll identify if there have been any nodules in prior exams and measure the change in size or change in specific metrics to see if it's getting worse or better. And then lastly, we'll have automatic reporting, automatic classification of those specific nodules, and then push that into the report. So what a radiologist will do is that, let me just zoom out here. So what a radiologist will do is that with a few clicks, they can quickly go through all the stack and see if they see a certain lung nodule. So for those of you who aren't used to looking at these images, it's actually really hard. You have to be very very well trained in order to actually see these small calcifications or nodules, and it's not the easiest thing, and I'm terrible at it. So here I'm going through the case, and these are all new nodules on the left. So the left is the most current exam, on the right is the prior exam. And then there's certain cases where the nodule existed in the prior exam. So with just a few clicks, you'll see that we can automatically compare the lung axis or the volume of that nodule to see if it's growing or not growing. And we can automatically classify that nodule as whether it's a solid nodule, it's a part solid, or a ground glass nodule. These are all types of classifiers for that specific exam. So from there, again, it's all about the workflow. So when you think about this workflow here, there's actually, I think, 7 machine learning models that are used to actually create this application. And machine learning is not an app. Machine learning is a tool, and we use machine learning algorithms that are part of a workflow. But the reality is, that's I think a little misnomer, is that if you create machine learning models, like, you're done. The reality is not. Like, several machine learning models are created in order to make this workflow. And you need to have a way to ingest it. It needs to be, it needs to save time. It needs to be in a way that's in a clear UI UX that's not complicated. So we spend a lot of time around the UI UX and making it as less complicated as possible. So with a few clicks, they can see the results. Or with a click, I can push this to the report. So again, and I can modify any of these results. So if a radiologist doesn't agree with it, with a single click, I can say, no, that was actually wrong. So our algorithms are based on a deep learning approach, and we have pretty good accuracies. We have over 90% recall or sensitivity based on about 1 to 1.5 false positives per scan, so it's not perfect. It's better than the average radiologist, but again, it'll get certain things wrong. And so there needs to be a way to reject the results, and that's a really, really important part, is any systems that push the results into the electronic medical record and that are wrong creates liability for the doctors. So that sort of UI, UX interaction is really, really critical to make AI be adopted in the clinic. And that's part of the key learnings. Let me quickly open up another case I have here. So this is another case. This is a cardiac case, and same sort of thing. So here I try to measure the function of the heart. So it's called an ejection fraction. And so when you click it, it'll automatically tell you what that ejection fraction is. So in this case, it's 58%. And so with I can hit spacebar, and what you're seeing on the left here is the bolus of the left ventricle and the right ventricle. So it tells you what the change in size is, and that's an important metric to determine how well your heart is functioning. So this is what's called ventricular function. And and again, there's so many different, this particular application is made up of 10 machine learning models. Each machine learning model is probably 1 year of work for one machine learning scientist, and we're paying about $200,000 per machine learning model right now. So it adds up substantially for a single app. So it's unfortunately something that doesn't scale well. So with that, I just have some, quickly, I know we're running out of time, but I want to mention the annotation. Annotations are critical in order to make us as accurate as possible. So we can leverage our own platform to actually collect ground truth, and so we have over 300 annotators that we use on a regular basis to annotate our images, all across US board certified radiologists to folks in China and India of all skill levels. So that's a big part of what kind of the pipeline is to create the machine learning models. And the last thing what I'll say in terms of accuracy, so what you saw for the cardiac application, where we were able to show 36% time savings on a scan, that's substantial. That helps in terms of them get through more cases. On the lung CT side, I can show you some, this goes into like the ML pipeline, how we actually create the model. So we have a proposal network, and we have a way to we classify each of the proposed lesions, and then we segment those lesions, and then that's what's shown in the application. It's based on 2D UNet style network. The classification network is based on a 3D VGG style network, and from there the performance is this. This is what we have on public competition data. In reality, in the real world, all of this is much lower, and depends on the type of data and the hospital and their workflow. So what we've seen is public competitions are an optimal setting. In reality, these fraud curves are actually much lower. And with that, lastly, if you're curious about what kind of tools we use at Arterys, pretty basic. We do Keras, TensorFlow, Python, and we use all kinds of compute. We try to get it as cheap as possible across either GPUs on site, AWS or GCP. And lastly, all this we've done with our team, and we're always growing. So if you're interested to join Arterys and learn more, I'd be happy to talk to you after. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
So, I can use here. So, I saw that you've got an MJ class 2, right? So, it means that you are not actually diagnostics, right? So, you are aimed to radiologists, right? So, are you, do you have a plan to actually go into class 3 to do the diagnostics or things like that?
Yeah, so there's a few people in the audience that are class 3 here. Right now, we just can't afford it. Like, the amount of time and effort required to be class 3 is just something that I would love to do, but it would cost several millions of dollars per application. And it would require a PMA, or pre-market approval, much more data, And also the liability goes up. So if you're wrong, you know, like you could potentially be sued, a lot of legal action. So we kind of steered away from it. I think there's a way where machine learning can be as good as an expert user. I think there's space for that, absolutely, but you gotta have patience and money in order to make that happen.
Understand. So the second question is that you are getting the feedback from the radiologist, right? That this is right, this is wrong. Are you using that for your further training?
Yes, we are, but in a very controlled way. There's this whole concept of active learning, and I think over time, we could make our system like Netflix and like the Amazon.com, where it'll know your preferences, and it'll know what you want to see, and based on your behaviors, it can change on the fly or daily. I don't think we're there yet, and also the FDA isn't there yet. They've released guidance documents to, actually pretty recently, that describe that workflow, but again, there's a lot of open questions, especially around validation. How do you truly validate that? So it's an open question.
So are you following the good machine learning practice?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What do you think your battle labeling is the element between senior experts and senior experts and data?
Yeah, sure. So the question was around data labeling and how do we get consensus ground truth. So there's kind of there's a few parts to that. One is in terms of the training data, one in terms of the validation, and one in terms of the test sets. In terms of training data, we try to collect expert ground truth from the cheapest resources possible. It depends on the application. For certain things, like if we're checking to see if a bone exists in an image or not, that's something that you can easily train for. But we've realized that the harder it is to do something, then the more expensive resource you need. So for long nodule detection, you need very high expert resources, and it's costly. So you're paying them $200 an hour or $300 an hour, depending on how good they are. For the best in the world, you'll pay $400 an hour. But the reality is, like, it depends on the task. So it depends on what you're trying to do. So we have the entire gamut, and we try to just be smart with it.
You said about the 5, 7, or 8 content and models working together for an app, right? So that each will have its own errors. Are you tracking the cumulative errors sometimes doing all the probabilistic models that you can add up, right?
Yeah. So to answer your question, so within an application, there's multiple machine learning, let's say, algorithms. And then sometimes for a single machine learning algorithm, there's multiple models. So there's kind of a factorial approach. So in terms of like, is there this cumulative effect? So depending on if it's a different machine learning algorithm for different parts of the workflow, there isn't this concept of how it connects all together. But in terms of for a specific thing that we're doing, like for example detection or segmentation, for sure there's this idea of tracking performance of the combined effect. And then we've had to track that for the FDA, and we've had to track that for our own internal validation for deploying these models. Yeah.
So I was curious about, do the radiologists in their imaging room, are they totally replacing it with your viewers, or they're kind of using it in addition to what they have?
Yeah, so great question. So the question was, are we replacing their primary viewers or not? And I'd say right now they're replacing it for the application that we do have. So for the cardiac MRI application, they're going to use our viewer as the primary viewer. For the lung application, they're going to use our viewer. It'll depend a little bit on application. So that's kind of still an open question of like, will they want to use their existing systems, and us for depending on application depends. And it's still TBD.
What's been your experience of the settling time? I mean, till people really start using it?
Long. It's very long. And I would say on the order of years. And it just takes time on training. Like, people don't know how to use it initially. And if you're replacing certain systems, like some post-processing software, it's a little bit easier because they're used to that. But if it's AI that they've never seen before or haven't interacted with, it's an uphill climb, especially because we can prove that we're better than the average radiologist or average mammographer. And there's a lot of tension in the hospitals because people don't want to be replaced. And so we're selling to the people that we're replacing. So it's a lot of bureaucracy. And so I think that's what I'll take to like many years before this actually takes off. Yeah.
Thank you.
So how are insurance companies viewing? Have they been any positive?
Yeah, so insurance companies are the laggards. So they'll move only when there's consensus, the guidance documents, when there's been all kind of clinical studies and publications shown. So it's still early days. Like first comes the FDA, and there's just a handful of companies that even have FDA clearance right now, even using machine learning. So that's an order of like maybe 15 to 20 companies now. So it's still very early days, and a lot of these companies don't have like pivotal clinical trials, prospective clinical trials. There's a few, but I think it takes a whole lobbying effort and it takes time. Eventually it'll come, and maybe insurance will have to require it. Say, hey, I'm not going to do this exam unless you've done it. But it still takes a ton of data and millions of dollars to make that happen. Yeah.
So 5 years or 10 years?
I guess maybe 10. Yeah, I don't know.
Good guess.
Yeah.
Yes, so I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. One was, how do you deal with the differences in the image acquisition stage, because you probably have some from different vendors and things like that. Secondly, beyond the value is primarily an efficiency improvement, or also being able to detect something that a radiologist might miss.
Yeah. It's on the latter question, it's both. I think that the value prop is obviously time savings, but the accuracy is like something that will be missed. It's actually hard to charge for that latter. The whole business model side. Time savings is a little bit easier to charge or around to create a business model for it, because you can say, you can make an argument around the radiologist time. So the value prop is there. I think AI will create new business models, but it's still very early days on that side. In terms of data diversity, the more vendors you can get up front, the more protocols you can get up front, the better your model will do. So the more time you spend, even just spend 2 years in the field just collecting ground truth data, the better you'll be. But the worst thing you can do is just collect it from a couple vendors, get it deployed, get it cleared, and then you realize in the field it'll do terribly. So that's a big lesson learned.
And for the FDA, dealing with machine learning, in the past, you get a product certified, and if you made major changes to it, you'd have to take it back for recertification. So there's continuously learning as the FDA deal with the system that's changing over time by itself. And the second one is how do they deal with something that's a black box, that's not a known algorithm,
Yeah.
what's going on inside of deep learning.
Yeah. So let me answer the second one because it's a little bit easier. So the FDA recently, I would say recently, in the last probably 5 years, have accepted like say black box algorithms. So this idea of as long as you have clear validation to show what the inputs are and what the outputs are, and to show the accuracy, they're fine with it. Like even when you submit to the FDA, like you don't have to show all the details of how it works, and even you don't submit code. You just submit documentation just to show what it's doing, but they also don't know what's like. They don't know the inner details, and so they don't have time to understand it. And so they have time to look through the test reports to see how well it's doing, and so that they trust the manufacturer in a way, right? So that's been fairly well received. I mean, at the end of the day, they've been accepting these types of black boxes in a way because deep learning, CNNs could be considered black boxes. So and so that's kind of okay for now. In terms of constantly retraining, relearning. In general, there's you can follow the FDA guidance, and there's a tree that determines when you have to resubmit or not. And in general, if you're not changing the architecture, I would say that you do not have to resubmit. As long as you have proof to show that you've done the validation, I would make the argument that you do not have to resubmit. But it's still an open question. It goes back to this active learning. If it's truly actively learning by itself, I think right now you do have to resubmit. But there's whole initiatives happening right now with like pilot programs and pre-cert programs around this. Yeah.
So you are only changing the performance, not the input or unfortunate intent.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why it's lower
Risk, yeah. It also depends on the risk level of the algorithm. If you're using machine learning to pick the color of the UI, that it doesn't matter. Versus if you're doing it for detection of modules, then it does matter. Yeah. I don't want to use all your time.
We have the last.
Sure.
Are you able to use all of the data that touches your system for product development, or do some customers not allow that?
So we've been lucky that we have 100% data rates, usage rights. It's been a battle, but we've held strong. Yeah.
We can have the new data, but one of the problem of the deep learning is the forgetting of the issue. So in that case, you retrain everything you have so far. Or is there any special method to avoid the forgetting issue?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that. That's something that I can get back to you on that. Yeah.
Okay, so we have to continue. So thank you very much. It was a really good lecture. Before we continue, I just want to announce that how many people know CVPR? Raise your hands. So the next CVPR is the computer vision and pattern recognition. It's the best conference for computer vision, and it is going to be in 10 days in Long Beach, California. If you do not happen to be there, you can have some look inside by our magazine, and we are partnering, we are the official partner of CVPR, so you will be able to read a daily issue and learn about what is happening there. All you have to do is to register. You can search for RSIP Vision CVPR 2019, and you'll get it to your email. So you can use it. So, I was wondering what will be subject that our community will be happy with, and I decided to work on the project management of medical AI, because I guess that most of the people here are sometimes involved in managing such projects. So we know that deep learning is now the prevailing technology. Most of the academic effort is in this direction, and in the industry, all the companies are trying to re-examine their existing products and trying to find whether a new version with AI can give much better results. And of course, big wave of startups on this subject. Now, in terms of project management, if you look at on all these charts, they are very short of giving us a good way to manage it, because there's a lot of specific things in computer vision and AI. So we'll have today 12 tips on computer vision project management. So first of all, tip number 1 is to review at least 100 images. And the reason that I say it is that sometimes we get overwhelmed with the hope or the aspiration that any problem can be solved by AI. So we take some examples and we decide immediately that this is a good example and it can work very easily. But it is good to have a really good scan of many examples before we decide on the strategy that we are going to attack this problem. And of course, it is part of this research has to be done with clinicians, because the radiologist, the clinician, have a very good understanding of the different appearances of phenomena, and then it helps us to understand what is the variety that we are going to see. So let's look again on lang nodules. If we start with lang nodules, the first example, A, is an example of a solid lang nodule. It is very easy, and if we see those examples, we can think that it's a very easy job, and we just have to train it. But it seems that the story is much more complicated. On the right, you can see ground glass nodules, which look like, something like a foggy area, and it's very difficult to catch those areas. So we have to know it in advance, and by that, to make all our efforts to cover the different cases. So our database, the training, has to be balanced on the different cases. Tip number 2, a tip for new ideas. Computer vision is not one kind of science. It's actually eclectic science that takes from mathematics, physics, signal processing, statistics, and more. So when we start to develop a solution, we better not try to solve it with one way only. We have to consult with a different team member and collect different approaches, because by that we can find a good solution that will be more stable for more data. And I will give you one example. This is an example of karyotype classification, which is actually a test that is very usually done. You want to count the chromosome and to see how many chromosomes you have. If you have some abnormality, so you can know in advance. Such project in the past, if we go 5 or 10 years back, should take several years of development. We actually was approached by one of our customers that developed different modules for him. He want to add it to his offerings. Using AI, it was much rapid to develop this system, and within 3 months, we already have good classification. And it was good, but not good enough. There was some glass ceiling of about 95% that is due to the fact that you don't have a clear and complete information about the chromosome. You can see that one chromosome blocks the other here. The other one, so you don't have full information. So, using a team with mathematicians, we were able to find another technology which was complementary. This is an assignment algorithm from graph theory. And the idea is that you don't go for what is called greedy algorithm to find for every chromosome what is the best fit for it. You're trying to solve optimization method for all the chromosomes together. So this is some complementary technique that could give us a much higher success ratio and to make it a valid product. And another thing that this part is not from the medical device, but from the LIDAR, we can also see that the physics itself gives us some limitations. Sometimes there are reasons why we don't get the best results, because there are some reflection and some limitation of the system itself. Then by image processing, signal processing, we can solve this problem and take all this abnormality out and do some painting and put better information there as well. Tip number 3, deep learning is not one way. There's different ways to do deep learning. And as we heard before, it is not one algorithm. In some cases it's 10 or maybe 20 algorithms that you need to do to solve the problem. The situation nowadays is that to say we are doing deep learning is like to say we are doing software. So it can be good software or bad software. Software that is idiosyncratic or something that anyone can use it and reuse it and maintain it. So it is very important that we know that our deep learning is done in the correct way. We'll see one example. This example of finding landmark in a spine X-ray. And the requirement here was to find the places, the corner of the body of the vertebra very precisely. But the way to do it was composed of two stages. Both are in deep learning. One is to find the vertebra and the body of the vertebra. This is the big boxes here. And after we find it, then to try to find the exact location of the corner. So if you're doing it like this, you have actually more information. In theory, if you have zillions of examples, maybe you don't have to do it. But in practical way, since you have already this area of the vertebra, so all you have to do is to use any detector that can find the corner. It doesn't matter if it is the S1 or S2, L1, which vertebra it is. So you can see that deep learning sometimes needs several algorithms that are composed together. Tip number 4, always deliver from proof of concept to validation. It is very important as a product manager to be in the feeling that you are not waiting for some wow after several months that now we can solve it. It has to be step by step every time to have results. When you start, you have to start with something, and sometimes you can even get some freeware or some code that can give you initial results, and then you start to fill the gaps, what you need to do in the next stages. And then, do incremental project management, which means maybe in the beginning it's only literature research summary, initial results, working software, simple interim or stub modules for integration that you know that it can integrate into the other part of the systems. Of course, validation, code refactoring, every step like that has to be fully transparent to all the stakeholders of the development. Okay. Tip number 5 is what to do when deep learning fails. It happens, by the way. So, first of all, don't panic and don't jump to conclusion too fast. So, don't say that deep learning doesn't work in this case, or maybe you just need more data, more complex algorithms. Maybe you read a new article that was published in some side magazine. This is not the way. You have to analyze the problem very deeply and to get to the bottom of the reason why it didn't work. It may be, first of all, you have to check about the code itself, because not all the software engineers and the algorithm developers are doing perfect job from day one. So you have to look whether there is some problem in the code itself. Was it validated? Look at the training set. Maybe it's not balanced. Sometimes there are problems with the annotation. Maybe the annotation is not consistent. There are some places where the radiologist or the surgeon doesn't agree. One says like this and one says like this. One wants to take a little bit more and one a little bit less. And maybe the information itself is too noisy. So just look at the same example. Maybe you have detected the lung nodules maybe there is other things like water, and you don't want to take the water as a nodule. So you have to be careful and understand, and if you see that this is the case, maybe you want to include some water remainder because most of the patients are there because they have some problem with the lungs. So maybe there is some water and you want to exclude it and train it as something that is not good. And also, false positive is something that is very important to take care of. It can kill your product because if you don't find specific ways to take care of the false positive, it will be unuseful. A clear example for that is the ophthalmic project about diabetic retinopathy. This is something that all the big companies was trying to take it as some example of project that will sure succeed. And it seems that it can do really good job, but in some places the level of false positive is too high. And what that means? It means that you get people that doesn't have diabetic retinopathy, you send them to a specialist. They come to, first of all, they are stressed, they go there, they come to the ophthalmologist and said, no, you don't have to be here. And he doesn't get any payment for it. So it has to be in a good proportion and to know from advance how you're going to fight the false positive. Tip number 6, during the project there might be some changes in the spec, and it also means that you have to change the algorithm. Some performance requirement change, input data change. So try to plan agile infrastructure ahead, which means that you know that not everything is going to be the same to stay the same from day one to the completion of the project. So you have to be in an agile position and to save intermediate results and intermediate modules so you can retrain and be in a good shape when something changes. Of course, the success criteria is a big story about computer vision, how you define it. It's not only the true positive, what is the price of false positive, false negative, is it only sensitivity and specificity, or there are more factors that you have to take into account. Just take an example. You have some module that is trying to put a box over an object. Let's say it's a person. So what is the success ratio here? Are you going to do some intersection over union? Or is it enough to know that there is a person there? This is okay. It gets very complicated when you're talking about brain tumor, because sometimes you have to be more precise. Maybe some doctors decide on different criteria. So all this success might be very complicated, especially that in the clinical side, it's not one objective criteria. Tip number 7, the effort has to be proportional to the data set. In most of the cases, you want to have all the information before you start your development, but in real life, it happens that you have a lot of promises, and then they say, okay, but we just have to sign some document with the hospital, and after several months, you get tens of examples, and this is not enough. So be sure that the amount of energy that you invest will be proportional, and you keep enough energy for the next version due to the growing of the data. What happens if you're running behind schedule? What can be the reasons? Is it programming skills or research capability, the ability of the team to converge to a working software? You have to get to the bottom of the thing. And one of the things that might happen is the data preparation. Because we think about the project, we tend to see it ideally. But there's a lot of work that has to be done in terms of preparation of the data. Sometimes you get very good data, but with different resources. So for example, in the ophthalmic area, you have different vendors. So you have Zeiss and you have Heidelberg, and everyone has his own closed codes, and it's very difficult to take it out of their machine. So you have to invest much effort to take all this information. And then you might have annotation that in one hospital was done in some specific way, and the other some other way. So you have to understand how much was really invested in the area of data preparation, so you will not be angry on the research side only after you understand how much was invested in the data preparation. Tip number 9, to use algorithmic design document. This comes from the compliance of the FDA or any of the standards. You have to have different documents, but from the project management, this is a real blessing, because when you have this compliance, you have insurance and monitoring of the project. Insurance because sometimes people are changing their workplace, and you have to remain with some clear understanding of the algorithms. And it really helps to do monitoring of the project, because as a project manager, you can follow from week to week and to see exactly, and you can get prepared to the meeting by going over this document. It's important to keep it concise, not a huge one, relevant, and that's it. Tip number 10, and there's only 12, we are getting very fast. When you start with the POC and you succeeded on this level, you start the production and performance code. So it's a tricky stage. The algorithmic packages are maybe different, and there's a threat of inconsistency and unstable code. So as soon as you're able, try to convert to the final infrastructure or the final language that you need, if it's whether it's C++ or whatever. So you will be more stable code, and you will not expect some changes or instability. And also, I want to mention here that there is some good opportunity about the network compression, which means that you have a network, you develop something, it works very nicely, but it may take, the performance is not so good. You can compress the network and still have good results. So from our experience, it's a very good opportunity there. Tip number 11 is that you have to adjust your management to the algorithms that are developed in this specific project. Because there is not one algorithm, there is many. In the left side, we see a list of algorithms from deep learning, machine learning, like SVM, deterministic algorithms that are lean on some physical understanding of the problem, and adaptive and heuristic algorithm. Sometimes you have good statistics that helps you to have better results from your algorithm. But as a project manager, you have to look on every algorithm to ask several questions. How much data you need for this algorithm to prepare before? And how does the development converges? Because sometimes you have, with the deterministic algorithms, sometimes you have very good opportunity. If there is some physics behind it, as soon as you have this algorithm, this will work for good. But if you have deep learning, it might change according to some condition. So you have to take everything into consideration, especially looking at the validation. Because at the end of the day, anything that you develop has to run through validation, and you have to see what algorithm is better for validation. And to not to take too much risky route that will not be confirmed by the FDA. And the last one is about maintenance of the code. It has to be in good shape that can be maintained for years. And the last tip is to use variety of tools. We have now a young generation that was studying too much of deep learning, and sometimes they lack knowledge of basic computer vision, which is very important. On the left side, you see a list of machine learning, classification, segmentation, and detection. It's not only the deep learning, but also SVM, k-means, and more. On the right, you see other advanced computer vision technology from GraphCut, Minshift, Dijkstra, and more. And they are very strong algorithms. There are cases where deep learning is inferior to non-neural network computer vision technology. It's not always that deep learning is the best way. If you have exact measurement or pre or post processing that you have to do, sometimes it's 3D reconstruction or model-based reconstruction, where you know something about the model, it's not easy to insert it into the deep learning algorithms. So you have to know, even that deep learning is the best practice, the best practice in reality is to use more than one technology. So remember, even the bigger hammer cannot replace full price. So you have to use many technology. I'll give you an example. This is from ophthalmology. On the left you see fundus images, which is images of the bottom of your eye that you just can put some light and look through the pupil. But the region that you see is very limited. So you ask the patient to look up and down, and so you get the images of the different part of the retina. Now, one of the models that we develop is making a panorama and getting to understand all the blood flow in the retina. But to solve it, the way to do it is very much like the problem of the globus and the atlas. So the globus is a sphere, so the atlas, being 2D, cannot give you the full information. So what we had to do is, first of all, to take those images and project them back to some imaginary sphere. And we were lucky because most, or let's say, it is the variety of the radius of the eyeball is very limited. So it was very easy to find what is the best way to project it back to some sphere, and only as a sphere it can match. So we can see that this cannot be done just by deep learning. Another example, this is a research that we've done with a leading hospital in Tel Aviv, and this is about retinal layers and the use of a fully convolutional network to find the inner layers. So we can see that the retina has inner layers. them is very difficult. So using advanced technologies like deep learning, it was much easier. So we got more stable results because, in fact, most of the algorithm can work until you get to some pathologies, and this is the only places where we need this software. So when you have pathologies, most of the algorithms are not stable enough, but using deep learning and fully convolutional network give you good results. But in fact, if you try, so B is the result, which looks stable, but if you look on the details, we can see that there is some problem here, and it is not perfect. So we need to introduce another algorithm. Here we use an algorithm from graph theory, which is called the Bellman-4 or the extra, which finds the best line that goes from side to side, and you can see how smooth it is. So we see that the combination of algorithms is much better. So as a summary, we talk about planning and defining the project, first of all from the success in the eyes of the project manager perspective, and the validation process during the different phases. We talk about the different algorithms that calls for different project management strategies. And about tracking the progress, keeping your eye on the ball, which means incremental techniques to get results in each stage, and some tips. So first of all, thank you very much, and good luck with your project. And if you have any other tips, you're invited to send to me, and when I will mention them, I will mention your name. Okay, thank you. And we hope to have another meeting like 2 months from now, so we'll meet you. Thank you very much, and see you. And don't forget there's